Okay, in this video I'm going to quickly review the three types of quadratic equations that we've covered up to now, and then solve a number of examples. To really understand this, you must have watched and understood the other videos on solving quadratic equations, so make sure you look at those first before you really try and understand this. Up here I have my type 1 equation. X squared minus 6 is equal to 10. How do we know this is a type 1 equation? Well, because it only has an x squared term. It does not have an x term. There's no 6x or 4x or something as there is here. Yeah, and there is here. So this is a type 1 equation, and this is how we solve it. We isolate the x squared by adding 6 to both sides. We get x squared is equal to 16. And then we take the square root of both sides, getting then x is equal to 4, or x is equal to minus 4. Now, many people forget this negative solution here, the x equals minus 4. Don't forget that. The second type is 3x squared minus 4x equals 0. Obviously here, yeah, the numbers, the 3 and the 4, could be different numbers. It's about the x squared and the x term. So this type of equation has an x squared term and an x squared term, but not some other number added. Yeah, as opposed to this type, yeah, has an x squared term, an x term, plus a 6. So that's why this is a type 2 equation. How do we solve this? By factoring out an x. So what we do is we take an x and put it outside the bracket. So this becomes then 3x minus 4. This is then equal to 0. And we now have the product of two factors. This factor times that factor is equal to 0. That means that one of the factors must be equal to 0. Otherwise, the product cannot be 0. And that means that either the x must be equal to 0 or the 3x minus 4 must be equal to 0. Now, solving for x here, this is a small linear equation that you can solve by adding 4 to both sides and subtracting by 3. And then we get x is equal to 4 thirds is equal to 1 and 1/3. Always leave solutions to equations unless otherwise specified. Yeah, do them as fractions. Yeah, do not make them into decimals. Leave them as fractions. The third type is really the most general type. There's an x squared term, there's an x term, and there's what's called a constant term, plus 6. So it's got all three elements. You could say that in the type 1, yeah, the number in front of the x is 0 and the constant is 0. Type 2, the constant is 0, but there is a number in front of the x squared and the x. And in type 3, yeah, all three of them are non-zero. This one you must factor as follows. You write down what you know, so namely 2 brackets, then you know the x will be there. And now you're looking for two numbers whose product is 6 and whose sum is 5. So that is going to be a 2 and a 3 in this case. That must be equal to 0. We have the product of two things, yeah, of two factors, which has to be equal to 0. That means that one of the factors must be equal to 0. Otherwise, we cannot get a product equal to 0. So that means that the x must be equal to minus 2, or the x is equal to minus 3. Right. So really, any equation that you're going to get will fall into these three basic types. And I'm calling this video different types of equations take 1. The reason is that we are going to get more complex types, but they will kind of be subtypes of these three. Yeah. Okay, in the first instance, I'm doing simple ones. Just a second. All right, I'm doing simple ones. And later on, we will kind of like make a subtype 1b. I think we'll have, and we'll have a type 3 subtype A and B, I think. We'll see where it goes. Right. I'm looking at this first one, and the first one doesn't really look like any of the three types, and that is because it isn't, and that is because it's really already solved for you. It's already done, really, because what we have here is the product of two factors. Yeah, it's given to you. Those two factors are given to you, and the product of those two is equal to 0. That means that one of the factors must be 0. So either the minus 3x plus 5 is 0, or the half x minus 50 is going to be equal to 0. And then solving this by subtracting 5 from both sides and then dividing by the minus 3, we will get x is equal to 5/3, which is equal to 1 2/3, or x is equal to adding 50 to both sides and then dividing by a half. Remember that 50 divided by a half, a lot of people difficulty with this, yeah, is the same thing as 50. I'll do that down below here, is the same thing as 50 times the reciprocal of a half. Yeah, the reciprocal of a half is 2 once, or just simply 2, is equal to 100. So the solution is x is 1 2/3 or x is equal to 100. Both of those are correct. So yeah, one more comment. What people will then often do here is that they won't get that this is one of these three types, so they'll end up multiplying out these brackets and getting something quite funky, but which will look like a type 3 equation, and it will be. And what would your next step be then? Well, it would be to factor this type 3 equation. After you'd factored it, what would you get? Well, you'd get this. And then what would you do? Yeah, you would set both factors equal to 0. So people would make the mistake of multiplying this out, then undoing what they've done and coming up with the same thing that they had. So really, this is how you do this. Same thing with this. This is not what we don't do here, is multiply this out. Here again, we have the product of two factors, so we say 3x must be equal to 0, or the 4x minus 24 must be equal to 0. Yeah, and that gives me not an NA here, as some people will say. No, there is an answer here. What number times 3 is 0? Well, it's 0. X is equal to 0. Here, adding 24 to both sides and then dividing by 4 will give you x is equal to 6. So these are the two solutions here. So now I have x squared. This is c x squared minus 21x. Yeah, looking at it, I've got an x squared term, an x term, no constant c, no constant added. In other words, it's a type 2 equation. How do I solve this type? By factoring out an x. So I get x times 8x minus 21 is equal to 0. That means the x must be 0, or the 8x minus 21 must be 0. And that gives me that x is equal to 21/8, which will then be equal to 2 5/8. Both of these answers are correct. Again, do not turn this into a decimal unless it says round your answer to, etc. This one is it has an x squared term, it has a constant term. In other words, this is a type 1 equation. The x term is missing. It's not this, it's not that. It's a type 1 equation. What do? I isolate the x squared on the left by adding a quarter to both sides. 4x squared is going to be equal to 1/4. Let me move this up a little bit. 4x squared is equal to 1/4. What I'm now doing is I want to get rid of this 4 here, so I multiply both sides by 1/4 times a fourth, so that x squared on the left alone is going to be equal to 1/16. Yeah. Another way to look at it is to say I'm dividing by 4. Well, what's a fourth divided by 4? It's also a 16th. Yeah. And again here we take the square root, and that will give us x is equal to a fourth, or x is equal to minus a fourth. Don't forget that. Yeah. Because indeed, yeah, minus a fourth squared is 1/16. Yeah. 4 times a 16th is a fourth minus a fourth is 0. That's a solution. We then have E. E is a type 3 equation. Why? It has an x squared term, an x term, and a constant term, so we must factor it as it is there. And that will give me x plus 2 times x plus 9 being equal to 0, giving me that x is equal to minus 2 or x is equal to minus 9. Okay. This one is a type 2 equation. Why? Has an x squared term, an x term, but no constant term added, so it's a type 2 equation. You can do two things here. You can either multiply through by 30 to get rid of the fractions, but because we need to practice fractions, I'll leave the fractions in for now. But you could do it, let me just, aside, let's multiply through by 30. Then the 2/5 times the 30 is 30 divided by 15 is 2, so that would be 4x squared. Yeah, and then the 30 divided by the 30 is 1 minus 4x. Is that correct? Yes, is equal to 0. And we could, continue in this way after indeed multiplying the whole equation by 30. Yeah. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave it as a fraction because we need to practice those fractions. So what I'll do is I've identified this as a type 2 equation. I'm factoring out the x. I'm saying 2/15 x minus 4/30 is equal to 0. I'm now saying I've got the product of two factors. One of them must be 0, so the x is 0, or the 2/15 x minus 4/30 is going to be equal to 0. I now isolate the x. I'm adding 4/30 to both sides, so I get 2/15 x is equal to 4/30 on the right. So now how do I get rid of this 2/15? Well, what I do is I multiply by 15, and at the same time I divide by 2. In other words, I multiply by the reciprocal of 2/15. The reciprocal of 2/15 is a fraction turned on its head, putting the 2 below, 15 above. I'm doing it on the left, therefore I must do it also on the right. 2's cancel here, 15 obviously, leaving the x on this side alone. Then I have 4 divided by 2 gives me a 2. 15/30 is a half, and apparently x is going to be equal to 1. Let's see if that is true. It is, isn't it? When I put 1 into here, I will get 2/15 minus 4/30 is also 2/15, and that of course is then gives a difference of 0. So this is the correct solution. So that was an explanation of the different types of equations that we've seen up to now, and some examples on how to do them.